Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey. And luckily, I brought a guest with a very lovely voice. I meet podcasters every day, and she has one of the best voices, in my opinion. That's just my opinion.
Oh,
And
wow.
I bring that up to say that she will be serenading you because I am tired. I slept 2 hours the night before last, then woke up, worked, drove 4.5 hours to the Atlanta Pod Tour. It was a great time for most people. For me, it was a long drive because I also drove 4.5 hours back right afterward to walk my dog. The only reason I didn't stay in Atlanta, you know what? Where is she? I'm gonna put her on blast. I had to come and walk her, and I
Oh,
am mad at her. No, I love her, but it was driving 9 hours just so I can walk her. I mean, I at that point I was like, just let her pee on the carpet. I'll just scrub it out. But got back 2 a.m. this morning, and then I woke up ready to wrestle with life. I actually do that every day involuntarily, but I woke
don't
up
we
with
all?
the mission to do it. If you're not watching on YouTube, I'm at a gym through the green screen. I'm not actually at a gym, but I am at what's supposed to be a wrestling mat. Might be, it's supposed to be. So yeah, I won't be wrestling our guest. Don't worry. But
I beat you,
she,
so that's a good
oh
thing.
yeah, yeah, that's true. She would beat me into submission and then take my cowboy hat and my boots, and I would no longer be Mr. Whiskey. I would be forced to retire. Not because I lost my cowboy stuff, but because of the other shame and humiliation that would haunt me for the rest of my life. But she, our guest, Ms. EmLed, as we call her, she wrestles with life quite a bit. In fact, she made a show called Wrestling with Life. And that's why I'm wearing a hoodie in the summertime in Georgia because I'm a wrestler and that's what we're doing. And we're going to wear hoodies and we're going to sweat. You don't need a hoodie to sweat in the South. And
No, you don't.
actually, Ms. EmLed just moved down south. Technically, she's like almost the most north you can get for the south. So she's a little bit cooler up there. She just moved to the beach. It's all over her Instagram. Be sure to check it out. We'll have that in the description below. But Emily, why don't you start with that? How exciting is it to go from nowhere, Ohio, as you described it, to weeks of moving and preparation to partying on the beach, having a good time?
I mean, it's been absolutely amazing. My roommate and I moved down with a girlfriend of mine from college. We have been getting to the beach every chance we get. We're living probably like 3 miles from the beach.
Nice.
And last night we went for the sunset and it was just unreal. Like I was just looking around in awe the entire time we're there. And I'm like, Kate, I can't believe we live here. I can't believe we live here. We've been here, it's probably been like 3 weeks now. And I'm definitely missing my friends back home. I had a great
Right.
group of friends back there, and I really miss them. But I'm mostly just so excited to kind of reinvent myself and kind of start over in many ways and get into new routines and habits. So, yeah, it's unreal.
Right. And still dropped content all throughout that move and even had some inspired episodes about organizing. I listened to that one and I was like, yeah,
Did you?
moving is a big thing. I've done it about 7 times in the past 4 years for the
Oh, have
military and
you?
other stuff. So,
It's
um,
stressful.
yeah, I always love packing the car though, because I'm like, man, I'm good. I got all that stuff in there, like playing Jenga. And
Yeah.
obviously you can't be like my mom and all the other moms out there who have three or more kids and a husband who doesn't help and she's packing the car. It's not that we don't want to help, it's the you're not allowed to help. It's the I'm packing the car. You kids are gonna get in the way. I know how to do this. I have a very specific method. And so yeah, and it's actually the exact area of the beach in North Carolina that you're at. I was gonna move there to work at one of the sulfuric acid production plants there
Oh,
because I
yeah.
was like, the beach, like count me in. And North Carolina is just beautiful. It's a little too
Yeah.
chilly for my taste, my preference, but that's why I had the Couple of Nukes hoodie, not available for sale. So I'd
Shameless
probably be
plug.
fine. Yeah. Yeah, but Ms. Emlyn, are you wrestling your friends on the beach? Is that what you're doing?
I should be, honestly. If anything, for the plot, for the content, I should be
Right.
organizing matches. I did wrestle for a year when I was in fourth grade. I was the only girl on the boys' wrestling team,
Mm,
and your girl was pretty good. I took home a couple trophies at a couple tournaments. I held
okay.
my own. If honestly, I go back in time and I'm like, If I could do it over again, I would have stayed longer. I only did it for a year. And I think it was because it started getting a little weird, like a girl
Yeah.
wrestling boys. They started feeling a
Yep.
little weird about it. But now there's so many women's programs at the collegiate level that I'm like, I totally could have been a beast and done that, gotten a great
Right.
college scholarship or something. It's a shame.
Would have been awesome. I
Yeah.
I feel that. I went to be on the fencing team and I was the only guy. It was all women. Like for some reason men thought like
Really?
fencing was not cool. I was like what do you mean? This is what men did for years. This is like our primal nature. What do you mean? It was just fencing's too fancy, because you're like, it's like how it is. But I did wrestling, indoor wrestling, when I was 5 years old. It was like first grade. My dad signed me up, and I hated it. I was like, I just want to go home. Just want to go home. I did not want to do it. So I was 5 years old. And I wrote, there's a whole section in my book about this, like, what if I had stayed? And nowadays I'd love to wrestle and fight. But when I was 5 years old, I was like, I don't want this. My dad's making me do something I don't want. And my dad was very telling, never teaching. And so wrestling, hunting, fishing, all this stuff, like he tried to force on me. I would love to do now with him or in general. But as a kid, the way he went about it just like ruined it for me.
No.
And I often think, like, imagine I had done wrestling. It's so funny. In my book, I talk a lot about how our parents don't make sense to us sometimes. Like, they really don't. They were like, you got to do a sport. You got to do at least one
Mm.
sport. That's a healthy, well balanced kid. So I was like, okay. I want to do hockey. They're like, no, you're not allowed. It's too dangerous, too expensive. And I was like, but I really want to do hockey. I love ice skating. My sisters were taking figure skating lessons at the time. I joined them. I was like, I love ice skating. I hate the cold. It's like the one number one thing I hate in the world. So it was very ironic. I hated it, but I loved ice skating. I was like, I want to play hockey. They're like, no, it's too dangerous. So they signed me up for lacrosse, and I was like, what? What? Do you know how dangerous lacrosse can be and how expensive it can be? I was like, what is this? And then I missed the age cutoff by like 2 days. So now they
Oh,
go, okay, you're going to be a band kid. You have to do either a sport or an instrument that's required. And I was like, okay, I'd like to do guitar. And they were like, not allowed. Too common. Pick something else. So I was like, okay,
too
piano. I
common.
want to be a classic gentleman. No, something else. And then they gave me the violin. And I was like, okay. I why even ask? My dad used to
Yeah.
do that all the time. He'd come up to my sister and I, he's like, do y'all want to go to the store with me? Like grocery shopping, because he would do it every single day just to get out of the house after he retired. And we were like, no, he's like, oh well, you have to go anyway. I was just asking to be nice. I hate that. I hate that. But yeah. So Ms. Emily, we're gonna talk a little bit about, some of the troubles you've had in life. Maybe they're worse than that or better than that. I don't know if you can one up me with sports like that, but at least you won medals and trophies. I won nothing. I just won the shame and guilt of being a man who quit wrestling because he wanted to hang out with his sisters instead. I guess, you know what? I love my family formerly, and that's what was important to me at the time. But no
Right.
hockey. I still have all my teeth, so I guess it's a trade-off. They're not in the best condition. Going to all these podcasting conferences, I'm like, okay, everyone has their teeth whitened except for me, but it's okay. It's funny. I showed my sister my new hat, and she was like, "Oh, good. It brings out the yellow in your teeth since it's a white hat."
Oh,
And I was like, "Okay,
geez.
I'm not talking to you anymore."
Brutal.
Yeah,
Brutal.
but EmLed, let's get into your life and what led you to make a podcast that is a place for people to get advice and share their stories and to learn how to wrestle life. Because no matter what, at some point, we're all going to have to wrestle with life, no matter how prepared we are. Life is going to throw us a curveball or something. Sometimes multiple in a row. Sometimes the world kicks us when we're down.
Mm,
And in real life, when we wrestle, we have rules like you can't hit them below the belt. You can't just start like punching and kicking people. But life doesn't have rules. Life does not play by rules.
true.
When we're wrestling against life, it's for our life. Sometimes it feels like it's to the death. So,
Yeah, 100%. So for me, like leading up to creating my podcast, which I created about a year ago, I had just kind of gone through a few years of my life that were just filled with a lot of struggle. Like we all struggled through COVID for sure. Then, I got laid off from my first job out of college. I
Mhm.
was working in Columbus, Ohio. I had just moved there. I was so excited about my first job. And then COVID hit, got laid off, lost my job. Same time I went through a really devastating breakup. I had been dating someone for 3 years at that time.
Wow.
And then we broke up after I got laid off. And then we continued to be off and on in this like weird situationship for like the next 3 years as we were both just dealing with a lot of our own personal issues that we
Right.
needed to deal with on our own, but weren't dealing with on our own. And then, yeah, just the combination of all those things, it created just this new kind of struggle, this new struggle with self-esteem that I had never felt in my life before. Leading up to COVID hitting and graduating college, I guess life had been pretty easy for me. Like things came very naturally to me in my life. I was an athlete my entire life. So I played soccer in high school, in college, love soccer to death. I told you I wrestled, I ran track. And to be honest, I got really comfortable being the best at a lot of things. I was kind of one of those people who like naturally excelled. It was really easy for me to talk to people. Like, I just didn't really have a lot of struggle. The only struggle that I had was kind of like behind the scenes. Like, my own mind tended to be
Right.
my biggest enemy. And that continued and just amplified when things stopped being easy for me, when I lost my job, when COVID hit, when my breakup hit. So, like, as I was going through everything, I felt like everything that I was learning as I was going through it, it didn't feel right to keep it to myself. I was like, here's all these things that I'm learning. I'm in therapy. I'm getting some of the answers that I've been looking for to these things. I need to share it with the world. So I started my podcast about a year ago and I started sharing everything. And then, really, my biggest struggle over the last year has been running my own podcast where I'm sharing vulnerably.
Right.
And I'm
Right.
sure running your own podcast, sometimes like sharing those things that are really deep, it can be very excruciating to lay your heart out on the table and be so honest about what's not perfect about you. And so I think at this point in my life, I'm getting used to, okay, for such a long time, I was like this person that had my shit together. And that's how people saw me. And now I'm so
Mm.
honest about like, no, none of us have it figured out. None of us have our shit together. All of us are struggling. So I guess it's this new identity for me in a way and learning
Right.
how to lean into that.
Well, it's interesting that you said that about this toll or effect that it can have on us by sharing. Because in a lot of episodes, we talk about how sharing our story can impact other people,
Mm-hmm.
how you never know who it's going to resonate with. And it's funny, the last episode was with a guest who had a terrible breakup at the same time the pandemic started, and she started a podcast, kind of
Oh, really?
synchronicity here. But what we discussed was living out loud and recovering out loud so others don't die quietly. And in the last episode, we focused on how podcasting is therapeutic for us as the host as well. It does help
Oh,
us
for sure.
realize things. And actually, in my book, I wrote about what really surprised me was there was a time I had a guest and she said something and it just stabbed me through the heart. She had said something that I had never realized about my life. Like it was perfect. And I'll share that here. Yayoi Komiyama, she said, children like to be heard, but they're mostly ever just seen. And I really felt that, children want to
Mm,
be heard and listened to, but most of the time parents just see them and just talk to them. They don't listen, they're not receptive. And I realized how much of my life that was the case. And after that, that was the first time on camera where I was like, am I going to make it through the episode? That was, wow.
yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah, I was like, children want to be heard, and often
Yeah.
they're not. Even as a teenager, a lot of adults get this kind of belittling attitude toward you because you're a teenager, younger. Even when you're in your 20s, everyone's still
Oh,
belittling
yeah.
you for your age
Oh,
and
yeah.
trying to detract who you are as a person or from what you have to say. And I think it's
Yeah.
such a messed up concept in this society, looking
Mm,
down on people because it's like you haven't lived life, which as we know, as most of our guests have shared on both of our shows, it, some people live a lot of life in a short time. I mean,
100%.
yeah, there's definitely a lot of wisdom that comes with age and experience, but there's a lot of experience that can come despite age.
Son.
And so I hate that concept. You can be cautious when talking to younger people and be a little bit more warning when you speak to them about stuff, but that belittlement and the pushing aside children and making them feel not heard, and that has a lasting impact for life,
Oh, it does. Yeah.
especially with self-esteem. And I think it's part of the reason, I speak a lot against social media, especially the community of young women on social media that is propagating each other to seek attention just for, their physical appearance. There's a lot of bad stuff going on social media. I think part of that is not being heard, and they feel heard because they have all these people reading their comments or their captions or interacting with them on their streams or whatever it
Mm,
is. And that's the issue that we discussed actually, is that because parents aren't playing that position, because parents are just as distracted in the technology and in the social media as children are nowadays. Besides work, besides their romantic lives, their friends, they have a lot to do, especially in such stressful economic times. Parents are very worn thin. Since they're not playing that role, people don't have mentors at school, right? Because teachers can't be parents for every student. The guidance counselors have 15, 16 kids to take care of each minimum. So there's no mentorship. And what people are doing is taking to social media to be heard, to use it as an outlet.
yeah.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who will listen to you, but not for the right reason, or will
Yeah.
validate you in ways that perpetuates like false self-esteem or
Oh,
whatever it may
yeah.
be. And
Oh,
Emily, what I
yeah.
want to ask you about is you talked about going to therapy. And I know women are a lot more likely to go to therapy than men, but were you still having some kind of mindset, especially going from someone who was seen as perfect to me needing therapy, but I can do everything. Why would I need therapy? Like, what was your mindset? Or by that point, had you
Mm.
developed like, I need help and I'm going to get help?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of, like you said, stigmas around therapy, especially for men. We know it's a lot harder for men to seek help than women for sure. There is a little bit of that, like, you don't want people to pity you. So, like, sharing out loud, like, oh, I'm going to therapy, you're nervous to tell certain people because you're like, oh, I don't want them to think I'm a basket case type of thing. But I got over that pretty quickly when I just knew how beneficial it would be for me. And I am such an external processor. Like, growing up, the moment that I had a bad day, I would come home to my mom and just unload on her. And I would just tell her about
Mm.
what was going on, what I was struggling with, and being able to talk through it is how I would get through my problems. So I knew therapy would be invaluable for me for that exact reason. So once I kind of got over like the social stigma of it, and I just saw how beneficial it was, and I developed a great relationship with my therapist, it became something that I was so proud of. And I saw so much value in
Mm.
it that I wanted to tell everybody about it. And I was like, this tool being able to get really deep with someone who's an objective third party, who's not biased, who has nothing to
Right.
gain by telling you what you want to hear or by softening the blow. Like, it can be brutal sometimes in therapy. It's
Mm.
so needed because then you can grow. Then you can see yourself more objectively through a realistic lens rather than through the lens of your mom, who your mom loves you. She can tell you truths, but they're going to be a little softer probably than a third party who has nothing to gain
Yeah.
by being kind to you. So once I saw that, I shout it from the rooftops now. I think everyone could benefit from therapy, whether you've gone through really traumatic, horrible life events, or you have low self-esteem and you want someone to talk to about it. Whatever end of the spectrum you fall on, it's worth it if you can afford it, if it's available to you. There's so many options out there. But yeah, don't be afraid,
Right.
and don't let other people's perceptions keep you from getting the help that you need.
So you mentioned sometimes therapy can be brutal, that feel like a personal attack, which it
Yeah.
kind of is, it kind of is a personal attack. You
Yeah.
know, could you share with us like what was the most shocking thing that occurred throughout your therapy that you just had never realized about yourself? And was it one of
Mm.
those moments where as soon as someone said it, you looked back and put together all the pieces, you were like, wow, you're right. Like I never noticed.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing that's been really difficult for me is realizing how much growing up in a very Christian focused home impacted me
Mm.
actually in a negative way. And I love my parents so much. I'm so thankful for the Christian upbringing that I was given, and I still believe in God to this day. However, I do think with the church specifically, there's a lot of like fear mongering that happens very early where it's kind of like, this is how you should act. These are the things that you should do if you want acceptance or you're going to hell. And it's this very extreme act this way or something bad will happen. And what I realized in therapy is that so much of my need to be perfect stems from that and not wanting to do anything that's going to make people not approve of me, disappoint my parents, make me
Mm.
go to hell, whatever extreme it is. So that was shocking because up until that point, I had never even really questioned my faith. Like I definitely had moments where I was like, is God real? Like all the
Right.
the big questions that we all struggle with. But I never saw it as something that deeply hurt me or deeply affected me or held me back as it did. So that's something that I'm still kind of working through now is okay, I know I believe in God, but all of the details feel very, I guess, muddy for me. And I am definitely dealing with a lot of anger towards the church that I'm trying to separate this faith that I have from the imperfect
Right.
people who are just like me and aren't perfect either and shouldn't be the reason that I question my faith. But, we're only human and I'm working through all those emotions now. But yeah, that was definitely the most revealing thing.
Okay. Not what I was expecting. That's pretty
It's a
interesting.
lot. Yeah.
I am a preacher. I have a Radiating Faith, shameless plug for my podcast where I preach. And I've moved away from the church, not because of stuff like that necessarily. So I was raised Catholic, which is very traditional. It's one of the
Okay.
strictest, not the strictest, there are much stricter religions and faiths, but I was raised Catholic. And for me, what ended up happening was through that church and through my parents, especially my dad mainly, religion was really twisted. It was very cherry picked. It was very, like you said fear. What I like to say is it was told, not taught. And there's a lot more whys to the Bible than just either heaven or hell. I mean, ultimately, I understand why that's put out there, but there's reasons beyond that for why you should do stuff. And parents and the church don't really explain that why. And
Right.
what has really helped me with my walk of faith was one, like you said, separating, knowing that the people that represent religion, most of them misrepresenting it, they don't
Hmm.
represent God. They represent organized religion and people. They represent who we are, humans.
Yeah.
None of
Yeah.
us could represent God because none of us are close at all to that. You
100%.
know, like, and what I always use the analogy is like if you met an employee of like SpaceX and they were a jerk or stupid, you're not going to be like, well, I guess everyone in the company is, and Elon Musk must be a jerk or stupid. I know for a fact he's not stupid. I don't know if he's a jerk or not. I don't follow him, but I mean, he's got to be a pretty smart guy. So smart, probably
100%.
smarter than me, but I don't think he has a podcast. So take that one. And I've never seen him in a cowboy hat. So take that one. But I don't want to diss him too much. Next thing I know, nowadays people are setting up. They'll set me up to like box him. They'll be like, "All right, first it's Jake Paul
Oh
versus Mike Tyson.
God.
Then we got Mr. Whiskey versus Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg." Yeah, I guess it's like a WWE Wrestling with Life. It'll be hosted by you, sponsored by EmLed Wrestling with Life podcast.
Yeah, I'll be the presenting sponsor. You already
Yeah,
have the mat behind you, so it's
right. I
perfect.
know. All I need is Elon Musk to appear. Watch this. Yeah, that would have been awesome if I could just, like maybe I'll edit it and make him appear, but I don't want to get sued. So that being said, oh yeah, religion. So if not that Elon Musk is God, no one take that out of context. But like if you look at the CEO or the founder of any company, and you just met one of their lowest employees, high ranking employees, doesn't matter. It's not representation of who they are, right? I mean, just think about the place, any place you've worked. We've all got that one coworker we don't like, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
and since I work for myself, that coworker is me, wrestling with myself. But that's where I am with that. There is a lot of fear-based, which I don't agree with. I agree with I mean, it's just like human history in the old kingdoms and empires and even the government. You
Yeah.
can always either rule with fear or rule with love. And a lot of people, when it comes to religion, want to rule with fear, which I don't understand. That's kind of the opposite of what we're called to.
Yeah.
I think if you lead with love and teach about why those things are important, and the book I'm publishing is a faith-based book, and it's about whether you're religious or not, the Bible has a lot of wisdom to it.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of wisdom to it. Like I was going over, it was amazing. There's a lot of parables, there's a lot of stories in the Bible that are very true to this day and age. A lot
Hmm.
of our moral rules and laws are based on that. And you look at, I mean, all our sayings can be found in the Bible, just worded a different way. The
Well,
love of money is the
yeah.
root of all evil. There was another
What
one
I
I said the
can't
other day.
what I can't help thinking about right now in this moment is just like the life of Jesus and how he lived and how if we look at him, he is the biggest inspiration for what we should be basing our Christian faith on. Whereas so
Right,
much teaching out there is fear-based, like you said, in judgment and very black and white. This is how you should be. Jesus never held people to that standard. Did he call them
right,
out when there was sin going on and they weren't living their life correctly? Yes. But he called it out in love and he still loved them. There wasn't judgment. He hung out with prostitutes, he hung out with tax collectors, and so I look at Jesus and all I see is love. All I see is
right,
non-judgment, acceptance, authenticity. And, he wrestled with human emotions, anger, sadness. Like he experienced the same life that we did here. And that is where I genuinely feel like we, as the Christian church, need to just pivot and all be moving more like Jesus, myself included, less worried about perfectionism, which is so much that it feels like Christianity is rooted in, like doing the right thing always. Grace just needs to be preached more, grace for ourselves and
right.
others. The world will be so much more harmonious and peaceful when we learn that.
And the fact that you always have people who aren't perfect holding you to that standard as well. It's always such a competition when it's not
Yes.
supposed to be.
Yes.
And, I support accountability, holding each other accountable, but there's mockery and condescension, and then there's accountability. They're very
Yeah.
different.
So
And
different.
it reminds me of I was on Indeed, not a sponsor. It's a job searching website, and sometimes they have you take a test randomly. And I applied for, it was a while ago. It was for like even though it was for babysitting or something, they made you take like the elementary school teacher test, and it
Hmm.
was long. It took me like an hour. It was a in-depth thing. And I found out a lot about myself through it because you get like five options, multiple choice, pick the one you're most likely to choose. And it was always like, if this kid is doing this, what are you doing? And I always picked, ask them about their behavior and try to understand where they're coming from. Whereas everything else was very punishment, disciplinary, either publicly or privately, mostly publicly. It was very like harsh. And I don't know if Indeed scored me as a good teacher or a bad teacher. I'd be very curious to know what they're looking at. But for me, I was like, if you just discipline without understanding the why, you're never going to get anywhere, in my opinion.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
children do act up sometimes for no reason, but most of the time, what they're doing has a reason behind it, especially in school where there's a lot of wanting to fit in, social
Hmm.
circles, peer pressure. Children also don't know how to cope with whatever's going on at home. A lot of times children who are acting strange in school or acting different all of a sudden, they got something going on at home. And like I said, they don't have parents who listen to them, or if the issue is their parents, they don't have a mentor to listen to them about that. So I think it's very important, both in the faith and with children, whether they're your own children or you're teaching at a school or hosting an event, to understand, because you can always discipline after you understand. But when you understand them first and you make them feel listened to, and then explain why what they did was wrong or that there's better ways to go about it, I think that's much more fruitful.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And if you look at our school systems and capitalism in general, like our entire world is built around these metrics and these ways of measuring, like grades. Did you do good or did you do bad? Like it's
Right.
teaching our children very early that their worth and whether they're a failure or not is based on their ability to perform. And so much of that can be combated, like you're saying, by being a good parent that gives unconditional love regardless of performance.
Right. And like you said, this being nothing but numbers almost, and it starts
Yep.
with grades, but look at how social media is, who has
Same
more
thing.
followers, who has more downloads, who has more
Yep.
whatever it is. It's the same way as it is with grades. In the military, especially, I saw this where the people who had the lower scores were the best workers. They had work ethic. They stayed longer. They would do stuff. Where the people who had the highest scores were the laziest, were the ones taking shortcuts. They actually were worse workers in the nuclear program than those. And it's funny, if you look at the statistics, most of the people who actually end up making it through that program, which is America's hardest academic program, it has so many people drop out of it or fail out of it. Most of the people who make it were the average or below average people when it came to that grading system over there, especially once you get to the fleet and onward, because they had the work ethic. And I'll say, and I guess it's like a 4.0 GPA scale that we use. And so
Right.
people would be like, I'd rather work with someone who was a 2.5 or a 2.9er than, a 3.8er because they are used to working long hours, to having to work. You talk about being perfect and then finally facing something, you're like, I'm not good at this. And when I got to nuke school, they gave us a bunch of presentations and they're like, hey, y'all are the 1% of Americans who can actually qualify for this job. Y'all are like the smartest of smartest. And most of y'all probably didn't try that much in high school. You just knew stuff. You just got good grades. Everything came naturally to you. This
Yep.
program will challenge that. You will not be able to do that. Only 1% of y'all 1% will be able to just naturally pick this up. It's very
Yeah.
difficult. And so many people, myself included, we're like, nah, dude, we've always known everything. It's easy. And that was the first time we've ever had academic setbacks or had low grade points or had to study. Some of us were studying for the first time, learning how to write notes and draw diagrams and stuff. And
Right.
I think it really challenged a lot of people. Um, I took it as an opportunity to learn and grow. I was like, okay, so I guess I need to study some things. Not everything's gonna be natural to me, and I formed good study habits and work ethic from it. I think, like you said, how you respond, because you and I both easily could have down spiraled. When you had all your difficulties, you could have used, especially during the pandemic, that as excuse to just rot away in bed
Oh
on
yeah.
social media doing whatever. Instead, you took
Yeah.
it as I'm going to change my life. And so you've got your show now, and I know, how has it been you've had your family members on and close friends, correct? So how has that
Yeah.
experience, you know, especially with your parents, like, did you learn stuff that you just wouldn't have imagined, and has it made y'all closer?
Definitely. I mean, even just coming to them and being like, hey, this is a topic that I want to talk to you about. Like, for example, with my dad, I came to him and said, like, you are the person in my life who I see as having integrity and doing the right thing. I want to talk to you about like how you live your life that way. And so we dive into this topic and so many things about him that he hadn't shared with me about like his own struggles to do that, situations where he had the opportunity to do the right thing and didn't. And this is my dad. And like, I think we kind of grow up seeing our parents as like these perfect people, our role
Right.
models, and so it brought this element of humanity for them. And I think too, somewhere in my therapy journey, I think there's a lot of emphasis of let's find out what went wrong in your childhood to like make you the way that
Mm,
you are. And that's definitely the case in some situations. But in mine, like it was, I think mostly the religion foundation that really messed with
mm,
me. My parents were very loving. They were very understanding. They just always kind of made space for me. Like I've always had very big emotions. They've always made a lot of space for that, so they always let me be me. So it wasn't like my parents screwed me up in childhood. But like having these conversations with them and seeing that they're not perfect, it gave me a lot of grace for my parents because our parents do the best that they can with what they're given when they become our parents. And they're flawed, imperfect human beings too. And as a kid, you grow up and you just don't see your parents that way. So, like,
Mm,
to really just look at them from a different lens and be like, okay, you guys were 22 and 23 when you got married. You were just a little bit older than I am right now when you had me. It just changes everything to look at their life, to see their struggles and be like, wow, like you were a kick-ass parent for what you had at the time. You broke so many generational curses that your parents had that you didn't pass down to me.
wow.
It just really moved me from being a kid to being their friend, like being their kid to being their friend and
Mm.
having more of an adult relationship with them. So my parents killed it. They did great on the podcast. I've had my siblings as well. And we've been close our whole lives, so I can't really say I learned too much about them in the
Right.
episodes. But having my close friends on has been really freaking cool because I think I've challenged them also to be more
Mm,
vulnerable, like to get on a microphone and share the kind of things that you and I
right.
share. It's not easy and it's not normal either. It's not normal at all. So to give like my friends who have never done something like that before an opportunity to do that, it was really cool to watch them open up and start thinking about things differently and challenge themselves to say things out loud that maybe they haven't before.
Right. And you said something that really resonated with me, which was big emotions. Your parents made space, mine did not. So,
Okay.
it's interesting. And I've actually had a lot of relationship issues in the past with big emotions, either being called too caring, too romantic, too emotional, and all that stuff.
Yeah,
So I'd love to delve into that with you about.
sure.
I'm glad your parents made room for it. If you can kind of talk about what you mean by that, starting just there, like how did they accommodate that, or just knowing that that's who you were, and kind of elaborate
Yeah,
on what you mean by big emotions, like how that is played out in your life.
sure. So I guess how I describe it is I've just always felt things so deeply. So like if I'm having a bad day, I'm having the worst day ever. And if I'm having a good day, I'm literally brimming with joy. Like you can feel my joy. And I would just everything that would come at me, every emotion, it would completely consume me and
Mm,
dictate my ability to function that day. And I've always been kind of like what I would call highly functioning. So, like, even when I was feeling those big emotions, I would feel them behind the scenes, like with my family. And then I go out in public and I knew how to slap a smile on my face and be strong. So my parents really growing up made that space for me to process those big emotions. So my mom calls it Emily bombing. And
mm.
basically I will pent up my emotions for a long time because I feel
Hmm.
this need to be strong and perfect a lot. I'll let it
Right.
boil. So, something will upset me, something little will happen. I'm not happy about it, but I keep it in. And it would grow and grow and grow and grow until I would Emily bomb and I would come to my mom and my dad. My mom was kind of my go-to growing up. She just knew how to handle me very well. And she would let me cry, she would let me vent, she would let me just let it all out. And she would just give the best advice. And she told me, as an adult, she's told me, you just had so much fire in you and so much passion from such a young age. She's like, if you couldn't do something, it frustrated you so much. You've just always had this wild self belief and desire to like do everything. And she was like, I was so afraid that I was going to kill your fire as your parent
Mm.
because I was trying
Wow.
to, reprimand you, like get you in line. And she's like, I didn't want to kill your fire. I wanted to empower you because she's told me, she's like, you've just always felt so big. You're so different. You process things differently than most people do. So I just love my mom for that, for seeing that in me from such a young age and like doing everything she could to help me work through it rather than reprimand me and try to make me, conform or behave. And I look back and I'm like, I know how difficult it is to be an adult now and to work a job and take care of the home and balance the social life. Add kids on top of that and like
Right.
how well she handled me. I just look back with so much gratitude for that. And she's just such a badass and I have so much respect for her and my dad as well. But yeah, they always gave me that space to feel. And a lot of the feeling that I had, I got to a point when I was older where I looked at all these emotions that I felt and I thought that it made me weak. I was like, why do I have to feel everything so big? Does this make me like a
Right.
weak person because I'm such a sensitive soul? Like, does this make me weak? And it's only until recently that I realized actually how strong that makes me. And that was just like a lot of self-judgment getting in the way. Like, because I'm sensitive, because I'm deeply feeling, because I care so much about everything, it gives me the capacity to do the podcast like you do and to kick butt at everything that I do because I have that fire. But like everything, there's pros and cons to all of it. So I have this great asset to do all these amazing things, but I also Emily bomb, you know?
No, I understand that a lot. That's very relatable.
Yeah.
Not the mom part. My mom hates me, but
Oh
she loves
my
me on some
God.
level, but I don't talk to her anymore. But I was gonna
I'm sorry.
say the being sensitive, the caring, if it's a bad day, it's the worst day. If it's a good day, it's the best day. First off, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't listened to EmLed's podcast, I did listen to it. When she's talking about being passionate and the energy just brims and you can feel that joy. I literally listened to her talk about like making a list of what you need to do for the day to pack your stuff. And it was like so awesome. I was so into it. She was so happy. She's like, she does her little giggle and she's like, you know, talking about writing sticky notes. Because not every episode is like that. I was just the one I listened to, it was about how to be more organized in life, which some of y'all are very messy. Definitely check it out. But that passion, you can hear it. Like the conversations are great. And I was
Thank
gonna say
you.
actually for everyone who's watching, I don't know if they'll show up, but this ring is, hold on, let's see if I can get it focused. It's the Phantom Lantern ring. In DC Comics, they had the Lantern cores, which each core is connected to a single emotion. Like, everyone knows Green Lantern is willpower, Red Lantern is rage and hatred, Yellow Lantern fear. The Phantom Lantern ring was one that was made, only one ever. It was connected to the entire emotional spectrum. And I actually got it after a pretty traumatic event where I was told I was too emotional and there was a lot of stuff going on. And I got it as a reminder to be less emotional, but also that there's a lot of great things that can be made from that, like you said. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate you talking about how you thought it was weak because I've had a lot of times where I was like, I hate being like this. I hate caring
Yeah.
to have a breakup or be in a situation where it was like you care too much or you were too gullible, too trusting. So many times
Yeah.
I've been betrayed by friends or the same kinds of people or the same people for being too trusting, too caring, too forgiving.
Right.
And my friend described it. No one say I'm saying I'm Jesus. I get that all the time. My friend described me as how he said that Jesus came not for the healthy, but for the sick. And my reputation used to be tarnished from hanging out with people and outcasts that everyone else hated. And most of them were pretty bad people. And people never understood why I did that. And for me, it was always like a lot of y'all have not taken the time to get to know them or are so surface level. Or you know what? Once someone is outcasted in one place, it seems to like is a momentum is kind of builds like it ripples throughout. One person says one thing and then everyone suddenly forms the same opinion without actually knowing them. But
Yeah.
what's always been interesting about me is I'm a huge movie buff. I watch a lot of movies and shows when I have time, which isn't often, but I think I have cried in during almost every single movie I've ever watched, sometimes multiple times, because I get so into it, so attached to the characters, and I can feel I'm so empathetic. Like sometimes I'd be crying too much, and like every movie and show, but I can, those real events or even those fictional events that are based on real life human pain and experiences. Like I really get into that, when someone has something, and it can be something I've never experienced, even like the death of a parent, but I'll cry if I see that in a movie and I see the way it
Me
affects the
too.
family and all of that. Like I'm so like you said, we're so emotional and into it and
Yes.
sensitive. And I've struggled a long time with finding a balance, especially when it comes to relationships with you're too romantic or caring. It's just too much. I never knew you could be too romantic, but they're like, you too many gifts, too many compliments. You're like, it's too easy, which is like, oh, okay, it's too easy. I love for someone to get me too many gifts and compliments. Like, I don't know who these people are, but yeah, so I get that. And I guess for my parents, it was that we don't have time for this, which they did. My mom didn't work, but it was like we don't want to tolerate big emotions. And my parents knew I was a very emotional, insensitive person, which my dad made fun of me, of course, as that's what men do to other sensitive men, unfortunately. But my mom, I was surprised she didn't make that time to be a little more patient, especially when it came to arguments and disagreements. Like she knows that I cry even when I'm angry because I don't like to be angry, especially at my family or people I care about. Like I don't like that stuff. And
Right.
like I'll get teary-eyed when I have to fight my friends, you know. I don't want to fight my friends, you know. I
Right.
love them, I care about them. And I've always people have always mistaken that for weakness, you know, not wanting to
Yep.
it's not that I don't want to stand up to people. I just lament at the idea that we can't have peace, that we can't, that we have some of these confrontations, especially depending on what the subject matter is. So when it came to like your big emotions and having that turnaround where you're like, you know what, it's not weak, it's made me strong. Was that really a self-discovery or did therapy play some part of it or your podcast? Like what really brought that about where you were like, you know what? I want to be this way and I want to keep being this way. And do you still have regret over it or you've mastered who you are? Because when you mentioned I like why were you made this way?
Mm.
That really resonated with me because often have conversations with God like why did you curse me with such a big heart, such a caring heart? It's like it's a
Yeah.
blessing and a curse, you know, unconditional love and it's like God, you've let me. I've had the same thing happen over and over again, and it's like, you know, this sucks. So if you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have not mastered myself whatsoever. I am very far away from that. And I don't really think any of us will reach that in our
Right.
lifetime. And I think that's a nice big sigh of relief for all of us because we're never going to have it figured out. And that's really nice to not have that pressure to figure it out. Definitely have gotten to a place though where I wouldn't change the way that I am, but that doesn't make it easy to be this way all the
Okay.
time, especially on the bad days. My dad actually said to me recently, he's like, there are some people in this world, Emily, and I think you are one of them that are tortured souls where you are
Hmm.
very smart and your heart is very big, but because of that, you overthink and you wrestle with yourself a lot more than
Yep.
the average person. And I'm like, yep, that sounds like
The
me. Yep.
overthinking is now you're personally attacking me yet again, back to back to back personal attacks. But I understand that, especially when being smart doesn't help because then you think of all these crazy things that other people wouldn't. We think too much. We think of every single possible thing, but also
Exactly.
like I'll assume that you're a people pleaser as
I
well.
used to be.
Typically, okay. Yeah, because when it comes to people who are sensitive and big emotions, a lot of times we're people pleasers because we care a lot about how other people feel and about wanting them to be happy. And I'm still working on I've done a lot in the past few months and past year on setting boundaries and transparency and accountability. But it's
Yeah.
still hard. I still want to, you know, forgive people who have hurt me because I don't want to lose them. But there comes a point of self-respect and self-love that I'm trying to learn and
Yep.
understand that I can't keep letting the same people hurt me, especially for the same reason, and that we can only be responsible for other people's choices and lives so much. And
Right.
as empathetic as we are to what they're going through and feeling like we're living it ourselves too, it's their life, not ours.
Well, let me tell you something my therapist told me about people pleasing that blew my freaking mind.
Okay.
She told me people pleasing has nothing to do with you wanting to be a nice person or you wanting to care about
Hmm.
other people like we think it does. It actually has everything to do with us wanting to be in control of situations,
Hmm.
to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to not rock the boat, because we don't want to have to deal with the emotional turmoil of that. And it makes sense when we're sensitive, deeply feeling people that we anticipate oh, this person's going to be upset at me. They're not going to like me. They're going to tarnish my name, whatever fill in the blank you
Right.
think they could do against you. We're trying to avoid that outcome. And that's actually the root of people pleasing. When she told me that, I was like, holy shit, this is just my need for control projecting onto other people, but I'm disguising it as, oh, I'm just a good person. I'm just nice. So
Hmm.
after she told me that, I was like, that's not going to fly because that's not being authentic to me and what I really feel. And I'm definitely not perfect at it. And I think it's easier to people please when you feel like there's a lot on the line and it's just like not worth the confrontation and you're like picking and choosing your battles. Like
Right.
that's one thing. But if it's a way of life, it's completely different. And like you said, the self respect and the self love to be able to look at someone and be like, I love you so much, but you are taking away from my life more than you're adding to it. You can't
Right.
be here anymore. It's really hard to do that, but it's so necessary. And I've done that several times over the last year with different people in my life. And I have absolutely no regrets over it. Doesn't make it easy, but
Right.
I have no regrets.
Well, especially when it's family or like a lover, then it's especially hard, you know.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
Fortunate, you know, so and typically that's where it's the worst in life when it comes to people pleasing is because, well, they're family or I love them. And you put on all
Yeah.
these additional excuses, justifications for
Yep.
why you have to do what you do. So,
Yep.
EmLed, where do you see the future of your show going with everything you're going through? You're growing as a person every day and perfecting, kind of like your mission and what you want to do with the show. So, where do you see it going?
Great question. I think right now we're going to be pivoting the show in general to a little bit more of a positive, fun, lighthearted vibe. The last few episodes, the last few months got really deep. I had friends on talking about drug addiction, porn addiction, just really deep battles with yourself. And I'm not going to lie, like having those deep conversations and going into a place of my deepest shame really took a toll on me to like talk about that kind of stuff. So I was like, this is not sustainable. We need to lighten it up a little bit. So me and my roommate Kate, who just moved to North Carolina with me, we're starting a series. We're calling it Seaside Sagas. And we're just
Okay.
going to be talking about our experience moving to a new state, completely starting our life over, making new friends, working and living in a new city. We're trying new things like surfing that we've never done before. So, really pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. And we're going to just be getting on the mic every week talking about what we experience, who we meet, our fun stories, struggles that we have.
Right.
So, it's still wrestling with life, but it's a little bit more of an inspirational spin and just hoping to encourage people who have ever thought about moving and starting over that it's possible, that it's not going to be easy, but we're hoping that it's worth it. And so far it has been. So I'm so excited for that series. I think it'll
Right.
be a really fun, nice pivot.
Well, and at the time of this recording, the most recent episode was about how, as creators, cringing at our old content or ourselves sometimes. Like,
Oh,
I
yeah.
didn't listen to it yet. I just saw some of the clips of it, and I was like, you already know it's gotta be a lot of chuckling going on, like cringing
Oh,
at our
yeah.
old stuff, like
Oh,
cringing
yeah.
at our moments. And how has that been going from being a person to being like a social media, like all over? Because I mean, was your life kind of very private beforehand, and now it's all over kind of?
I've always loved social media. I've always been kind of an open book, even with struggles that I've had on social media. I've tried to
Okay,
always keep it real. But this is definitely like a big step further than what I've ever done before. And I'm not going to lie, there are times where I'm like, man, I think I just need to step away from social media for a while because,
for sure.
for one, like my 9 to 5 job's in marketing. So I'm already spending a lot of my day on social media for that job. And then I have the
Right,
podcast and then I'm looking at it socially. And I'm like, it's definitely not healthy to be on social media as much as I have been. So I'm definitely still trying to find that balance. I try to create more than I consume, which I think is really important. But I also look at where I am right now. Like I'm 3 miles from the beach. I have an entire life to rebuild here. Like there's part of me that 100% wants to be like, you know what? I'm just going to take a break from social media and really focus all my energy on being exactly where I am, being present, building my life here. But then I'm like, I want my podcast to grow and I want to put stuff out there.
Right.
So I'm currently battling with that. I don't know what I'm going to end up doing. Do you struggle with that? Because you're kind of in the same
Right.
position as
So I definitely do wrestle with social media. I tried being a bit of an influencer. That was awful. I have taken down my cringe content. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, you won't find too much of that. It's well, first off, I would say hate on me if you want. It is a lot easier to be an influencer when you're a woman. When you're a man, it's a
I
lot more
believe that.
difficult. You have to have a certain energy and a certain which I don't have. Growing social media has definitely been difficult. The attention span nowadays for
Oh
like
yeah.
YouTube Shorts is about 20 seconds. It's very difficult for me for what I do to get 20 seconds that is like, this is great advice or this is really funny and this is really gonna bring people to my show or whatever. I've had a couple clips that have done great. I've had a couple that do bad. Sometimes I feel like I spend a lot of time on social media
Same.
but I don't have a big following at all. EmLed has a big following, but I don't have a big following at all. I only started Instagram for a couple of nukes like 4 months ago. I do post almost every day, but I'm doing it for the future for whoever wants to look back or, stuff just randomly shows up in the feeds and I'm not sure who it's going to resonate with. So I like to
Yeah.
have it out there for whenever it might hit. And I mean, I've seen other people who are much more popular than me where some old content that they had for some reason it just fell into the right hands at the right time and suddenly it blew up and it's like and
Right.
everyone's talking about that. So
You never
I
know.
definitely have had issues actually though. My friends confronted me because Mr. Whiskey is a different life than I live and we were hanging out and they're like, you keep trying to do all this stuff for Mr. Whiskey. And I explained it to them. Everywhere we went, I wanted to bring stuff so I could turn into Mr. Whiskey and film this short thing or do this thing. And they just want to hang out and have a good time. But I explained to them that social media for podcasters, for YouTubers and all that, I mean, that's like our lifeblood. That's how we reach people. It's
100%.
I mean, word of mouth. Sure, I can tell 100 people about my show, but social media lets me reach so many people
Right.
faster. And word of
Right.
mouth is at these podcast conferences, as podcasters, we can only listen to so many people's podcasts. If I listened to every podcast from everyone I've met, I would have probably almost 3,000
Yeah.
podcasts in my library right now. I don't have time for that. I really have time for one
Right.
or two podcasts.
Right. Right.
Plus, I have to listen to all my own episodes at least twice. So it's like and I run two shows, so I have to listen. I already listened to so much,
Yeah.
which that was an adjustment. And I don't know if it was for you, because you have a much better voice than me, but I hate my voice not as much anymore. Podcasting has helped me build confidence, voice acting. I've gotten a
Yeah.
lot of compliments from people, but I grew up hating my voice. It's so good in my head, and then obviously I think everyone's the same way. It sounds great in your head, and then you hear it on the show, and you're like, oh my goodness, that's awful. But it's so weird for me to listen to my own self talk.
Yeah.
I play back my episodes when I'm walking my dog, and it's like I'm talking to myself sometimes, it's like,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is weird. So, how has that experience been with you? Like, just hearing yourself and seeing yourself so much? Because before
Mm.
social media, I was like, I know you were involved with it. I was never a guy who was men in general aren't as big on social media. Most men,
Right.
not all,
Right.
but if you look at a man's Instagram, maybe he's got like three or four pictures, and they're like years apart. They're half of them are like crappy quality. You go to a
100%.
woman, sometimes she's posting once a day, once a week, months. Even the women who are not as big on social media, they're still posting more than like the highest ranking men.
For
So
sure.
for me, it was weird to go to it's helped me develop a lot of confidence. For some reason, Mr. Whiskey is a lot better looking, I think, than who I am normally, but I've also built a lot of confidence in who I am because I've grown a lot of skills when it comes to taking photos and videos. Far from good. I mean, but compared to zero, I've gotten a lot. So for me personally, the journey has been a positive experience, but like you said, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a high demand to constantly make shorts, make reels, make posts.
Yeah.
And people don't understand the work. Even with AI tools, there's still a lot of stuff with files, stuff with caching, stuff with recording. You're
Oh
doing
yeah.
all this stuff trying to schedule it. Some things can't be scheduled, and it takes up a lot of time. And
It
then doing
really
that nine to
does.
five of doing that. the
Yep.
last thing you want to do is come home and do that all for your own stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Well, first of all, I think you have a great voice. I think
oh,
we
thank you.
are more judgmental of ourselves than anyone else is. But it's been a struggle for me for sure because in the past, how I used social media is like I would only create when I felt inspired to create. Like when I was like, I really
Right.
have something to say, I really want to share this. And there's a different energy behind that when you share
Mm,
something from that place versus with this podcast. It's like, okay, so I just had an episode published. So I probably need to post like 2 or 3 reels to support that
right.
episode. So then you're almost coming from a place of like you have to check it off your to-do list. So it's
Mm,
hard to bring the energy and the excitement when you're creating from a place of obligation rather than inspiration. So
wow.
that's been a huge struggle for me is that it feels forced sometimes. And so as I've been
Exactly.
reevaluating how much I'm on there, I'm like, do you know what? I feel like I'm still going to post on social media, but maybe I'll just do it when I feel inspired, when I really have something to say and not make myself do it because this is supposed to be fun. And if that means that my podcast grows slower, so be it. I don't want to lose the passion that I have for it by trying to like pump out 5 pieces of content each
Right.
week. And I think the other thing I want to say too is it is weird, like you said, to
Mm,
perceive yourself, to watch videos of yourself and edit them, to listen to your voice and edit it. You are seeing yourself in a way that you've never seen yourself before. And it's almost like you then start thinking about how other people are perceiving you way more than you normally would. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's healthy to
mm,
constantly be thinking about how you come off. It's more important to my message is authenticity, being yourself, being all
right.
of you. And so I have had to really discipline myself. Like when I first started, I was so anal when I was editing my podcast episodes. I was getting rid of every single awkward pause, every
Right.
single thing that wasn't perfect. And a year later, first of all, I don't have time for that shit anymore. So I've eased up on that.
Yeah.
But also, it's not authentic if I'm getting rid of every little imperfection. Sure, it might flow a little better if I do that. And if it's really bad, I'll still edit it out. But
Yeah, yeah, of
I've
course.
eased up on that a lot. And I've also kind of made a rule with myself not to look back at my old content because I get very critical of it. And I'm like, this is how it could have been better. Whereas this is the first time that I've ever run a podcast before. I don't know about you. This is my first time ever doing this. So I've
Right.
decided to give myself grace and be like, we're not going to look back at old stuff because you're just going to be critical of it. So I don't let myself look and I try to just give myself grace as much as I can and remind myself that I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm doing something that most people in their life would never have the balls to do. And I let that be
Right.
enough.
Well, you know what? My issue is I go to all these conferences and all these meetups, and again, everyone's like, "Yo, it's Mr. Whiskey." Yeah, I mean, everyone treats me like royalty. I love it. Appreciate y'all. But you're there, and these are the serious podcasters. These are the top podcasters in the world, some of them. And my issue is I'm always comparing myself to podcasters. Some of them been doing this for 15 years, but I want to be there now. And it's like a
Right.
podcast isn't something you can kind of rush. Like it
Right.
genuinely takes time. I went on an event once and we talked about the infinite race. Really, that's what we're in, an infinite race. There is no finish line. Like we're putting out
Right.
our message and that's what matters. And none of these podcasters are really, I mean, I'm sure there's some of them that are competitive, but it's like we're all supportive and they understand where we're at. I mean, when I tell people
Yeah.
I've only been doing this a year and a half, I mean, people are like, yeah, it's going to take time. And I have other people who are
Right.
like, wow, you've put out more episodes in a year and a half because you're consistent. And I've been doing this for 5 years and I have an episode every few months because, life
Right.
happens. But
Right.
some stats just for you, EmLed, in case you're not aware of this. Out of there's over 3 million podcasts in the world. Out of that, only 400,000 are active about. So just look at that. How many are still going?
Wow.
The statistics show that every day about 593 more podcasters quit. So EmLed and I today have both surpassed 593 people. And I'm not saying
Hey.
that to detract from them. They have their reasons for quitting. There's a lot of pod fade for a lot of good reasons. A lot of people think it's easy that you just start making money right away, or that, it's easy to come up with ideas to talk about this and that. And generating new content is difficult. It can be.
Yeah.
Especially I like what we said about the feels forced. It's like
Yeah.
I feel posting on social media every day or every other day is a lot. And like you
It's a
said,
lot.
forcing yourself to go do these photo shoots or trying to, like I said, I have my two lives and trying to be Mr. Whiskey all the time when I'm hanging out with friends and being like, oh, wait, this would be perfect to record something here. And it's like, they don't want to have to constantly be my production team.
Right.
I feel awful asking my friends to take photos of me because men hate taking photos of other men. I'm sorry.
I bet. I
Girls
bet.
would be like, sure, girlfriend, you're so beautiful, slay. My guys are like, dude, you're so gay. Don't ask. I'm not taking a picture of you. Like, go ask some stranger to do it. I'm like, I can't stop a stranger and be like, hey, I'm a small time celebrity podcaster. Can you take some pictures of me? Like,
Yeah.
and then, no offense, gentlemen, but y'all suck at taking photos. My
Oh,
friends
it's so
be like
bad.
taking the worst photos so bad. I'm like, bro, how did you even look at this from this angle and be like, this is good?
You're like barely in
Uh,
the picture. You're
I
in like the
know.
tiny little corner.
I know. So what I do is I get my selfie stick and I set it up and I just film a video and then I just take a 5 minute video and I screenshot everything that ends up looking good. I'm like, if you can't do it, I'm gonna have to do it myself if no one else can do it right. But what I was gonna
I
say
get it.
is a further statistic, only about 7%, it's really 6.33% about only about 7% of podcasters actually make it to 100 episodes. And then from there, that number goes down even more small.
Wow.
It's called smaller. But yeah, so 7%. I mean, think about it. So I always say that as an encouragement, for these podcasters who are approaching 100 episodes or plan on it, uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or have made it. Congrats, 7%. And so that those people you're seeing on Apple Podcasts or Spotify that are the big gurus, they're like 3% or 1% of a 7%,
Oh
and
yeah.
I think that's part of my issue, EmLed, is that, I'm always looking at these other podcasters and I'm like, I want to be like them. And some of these conferences are reassurance because I talk to new podcasters or other podcasters. I'm like, you know what? I'm doing good. But
Yeah.
like you said, we are our own worst critics. We're
Oh
chasing
yeah.
perfectionism,
Oh yeah.
and burnout has been a huge issue for me, especially with the social media aspect of things.
Yep. Yep.
Because if it wasn't for social media, recording episodes and setting them up, easy day.
Yep.
There's editing, there's guest booking and all that, but that's it. Making all
Right.
these shorts and everything. And maybe I should try doing what you're doing, the not having to take a picture of myself every day. I hate that. I'm not a selfie
I
a day kind of
recommend
guy.
it. I recommend it. Yeah, like create when you're inspired to create. And if that means that you don't post for a week, you don't post for a week. Like your business isn't going to crumble.
I
Maybe
know.
people who are used to seeing your content every day are going to be like, "Hey, Mr. Whiskey, you okay? Like what's going on
I
over there?"
know. I'm
But
worried
life
I'm
will
gonna
go
lose
on.
everyone instantly. I'm like, no, come
You
on.
won't. You won't.
I follow
But I
people
get
who don't
it.
post every day, and I
Yep.
don't I don't unfollow them the minute they stop posting.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
like I'm gonna disappear for 3 years.
Right. Well, what
But
I
if I
keep
do,
reminding
I'll have a
myself,
podcast about what happened and where I was. I'll come back with a big beard. I'll be like Mr. Whiskey Senior, and they're like, "What happened?" You're like, "You'll never believe it."
well, seriously, like what I remind myself is this is supposed to be fun. Like I started this because it was a passion of mine, because I wanted to make a difference. And I'm not helping anybody by burning myself out for the sake of oh, it's going to look bad if I don't post for a week. Oh, I'm going to lose people. If I lose people, I lose people. Like it is what it
Right,
is, and it's that need of we want to be great. We've poured our heart and soul into what we do and that's amazing. But life will go on, if we're not perfect at it and that's okay. And it's much more important to make sure that you love it, you're happy, you're invigorated and you don't want to quit because we want to be in that 7%. So we
right,
got to set ourselves up for success that way.
right. So that's what you're doing now on the
Mm-hmm.
Wrestling with Life podcast, ladies and gentlemen. That's in the description below. You can find it pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. We'll also have EmLed's Instagram there, where there are beach selfies. There are some beach selfies, and she has been taking advantage of living 3 miles away. So that's
It's
fun. That's
beautiful.
great. Looking forward to Seaside Sagas. But ladies and gentlemen, check out the older episodes that are serious too. There's a time and place for that, and it might be something that really speaks with you. So I encourage you to check that out, to share her show, give it a review. So, EmLed, what would you leave us with, if anything? You've left us with authenticity, self-discovery, and all of that great stuff, as well as a whole podcast of all great stuff. But right now, if you had to drop your little, I don't know what you would call it, like are you a coach technically? Because
I'm
like
not a
if your
coach.
show is Wrestling with Life, you're technically the coach of the team, right? Or are
I
you
say
one
I'm the
of the
team
other
captain.
wrestlers? You
I'll
team
be the team
captain,
captain. How
varsity.
about that? Yeah,
Okay.
varsity team captain. If I had to
I'll be the
leave
water
everyone,
boy, like Adam
you
Sandler
know,
or whoever.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can be the
I
water
don't want to
boy.
wrestle, but then if I get angry enough, maybe I can get something done.
Yeah, I would say like life is just too short to be in your head. And that is where I spend a lot of my time is in my
Mm,
head. And so I am actively every single day doing whatever I can to get out of my head and to be as present as possible. And that's what I'm seeing everywhere is stop worrying so much about the future, stop ruminating on the past, just be where your feet are. And when I can do that successfully, that's when I feel the most joy. And I think that's when all of us will feel the most joy. So try to do that as much as you can. And thank you so much for having me. This was great.
First, no, thank you for everything you shared with us. And I look forward to us connecting again.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, the source of great pride.